This is the second in a series of 9 short videos designed to help you learn to use the rubric for instructional development and effectiveness for teachers or students with visual impairments, otherwise known as the RIDE for TVIS. The previous video provided an introduction and overview of the RIDE. After watching this video, you'll know more about the curriculum and instruction skill areas and proficiency levels, which are the rows and columns in the RIDE rubric. You'll also understand how the instructional skill areas relate to the proficiency levels. While watching this video, you may want to have a printed copy of the RIDE or an electronic copy on another screen, or you can pause the video and switch windows on your computer to take a look at the various pieces of the RIDE as we discuss them. We'll be taking a little bit closer look at the RIDE and go through the parts in a little more detail. So when looking at the rubric itself, we talked about what goes at the top in the previous video. So we really don't need to go over that again. That's where you're going to put your student information and other observer information. But let's look at the first curriculum or skill area called utilizing instructional time, which we've already started looking at. So if you look across at the different categories that one could be rated on, as we said, there are 5 different potential competency levels that we mentioned in the last video. Highly effective, which is the 5, effective, which is a 3, ineffective, which is a 1, and the intermediate levels of 4 and 2. And at the top, you'll see an example of what effective teaching should look like. So for the first area, a TVI whose lesson is organized, prepared, and efficient in utilizing instructional time would be scored as effective as a 3, or perhaps better if they were outstanding in that area. So in looking under utilizing instructional time, let's just pick one of the questions. Like number 2 says, was the TVI prepared to teach the planned lesson? So you would be looking for some indicators of how prepared that teacher was. Were the materials already out and ready to go? Was there a lesson plan that showed they were highly prepared for teaching that particular concept? Did it seem like they were fumbling and shooting from the hip, or the TVI knew exactly what it was, the purpose of the lesson, and what they were trying to teach? So you would look for those indicators of how organized and how prepared the TVI was, and then you would rate whether they were effective or highly effective or ineffective, somewhere along that scale. Let's go on to the second section, which was communicating for student understanding. And you would do the same process for each question. Communicating for student understanding, the indicator is that the TVI is intuitive, engaging, and intentional in communicating for student understanding. So one of the questions said, did the TVI explain the lesson in a clear, concise manner? Question number 5 asked that. So as you were looking for that answer to that question, was there an opening with the student that explained at the beginning of the lesson to that student what the purpose of the lesson was? Was it something that the student understood and their ability to follow? Because a lot of times we're teaching skills, but the students don't have a clue why we're doing it or what the purpose is. So it's really important to put that out there. And I understand with some of our students where they don't have the intellectual ability to understand, there are still ways that you can use object symbols and other ways to communicate with them what the purpose of the lesson is, so that there's some idea that we're not just randomly teaching things. So you would do that also with 6 and 7. Another example would be on number 6, did the TVI provide constructive feedback? And this would be things like looking at prompting and reinforcing that was clear, and check for student understanding during the lesson. A lot of times we just keep teaching, but we don't ever make sure that the student's getting what it is that we're trying to teach. And the whole area of over-prompting and someone positively reinforcing, et cetera, those are the kind of things you would look for here and decide whether that was effective, or was it too much prompting, or hand over hand instead of hand under hand. And go through that kind of rating process as you think about that tool. Let's look at part 3. Skill area 3 is differentiating for individual student or student group. And let's look at question number 9. Did the TVI anticipate the student's unique needs associated with his or her learning, and was the plan for individualized needs evidenced in the lesson? So that's something that you're going to look at. We focus a lot in special education on individualizing our lessons, but a lot of times the TVI may not be teaching to that individual student's needs and looking at how do we make this work for this particular student. They might be teaching it the way they taught it to another student. So looking in the plan and looking in the execution of some evidence for showing that it was very individualized to meet the communication needs of the student or the ability to learn. Going on to part 4, we're not going to go through all the questions because you can look at those yourself. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what each section is about. On section 4, this one is entitled TVI as Knowledgeable Practitioner in the Expanded Core Curriculum, ECC, and Evidence-Based Practices, EBPs. So the TVI is knowledgeable and comprehensive as a practitioner in the ECC and EBPs. Since really the primary role of TVIs is to be teaching in the Expanded Core Curriculum, that is pretty much the primary role that you have. This is an important area, and it's very unique to TVIs because nobody else does that except you, and the O&M specialist does also some of the ECC. But this scale is based on the ECC role around that TVIs would do. So in looking at, let's look at number 15. Did the TVI use an appropriate and consistent data collection method to track student progress? That's where a very important evidence-based practice occurs, because data collection, as you know, is critical to showing student progress and accountability. And if we're just teaching without collecting data and showing that progress, then there's no way to know if you're being an effective teacher, if you're making a difference in the student's learning and life. So that's a really important one to think about. Was there any data collection observed? And it should be observed in every lesson. And it can be all different ways to collect data, you know, from A to Z. The student can do it. You can keep a chart. You can count beans in your pocket. You can take notes that you put into a data form after the lesson. There's many, many ways to do that. But you don't just go in and teach without having that data to show that what you're doing makes a difference and that you're using practices that have been shown to be effective with this population of students. So this area about ECC and using good data and evidence-based practices is a very important one. Skill area 5 is learning environment to facilitate student success. And here we're looking at the TVI is organized and respectful in the learning environment to facilitate student success. So there's kind of 2 parts to this environment. 16 is, was the learning environment easy to navigate and organized? You know, were there just papers all over the place? Were the materials not age appropriate, not presented to the student in a meaningful way? Was it very confusing? So that you'd be looking at the environment. You know, if the student's reading Braille on a slick desk, is the paper moving around and there isn't a rubber mat under it to keep it from moving. So just using those kind of things to make the actual instructional process easy and appear to be organized. The other piece of that, if you look at 18, is did the TVI promote the belief that everyone can learn and communicate high behavioral expectations? So that's really where the respectful piece of this statement comes in. Because if the TVI isn't demonstrating that they believe the student can learn, you'll see that in subtle ways in how they communicate with the student, the way they touch the student, the way they talk to the student, the type of reinforcement they use. All of that comes out whether you believe that a particular student can learn or not. So that's what you would be looking for there. Section 7 is integration of technology and tools. TVI is proficient and forward-thinking in integrating technology and tools. And so not only does the TVI know what they're doing in terms of teaching assistive technology, and remember that assistive technology is anything, any tools, low-tech, high-tech. We're not just talking about computers and Braille notes and very high-tech kinds of screen readers and things like that. You know, it can be something as simple as a yellow overlay or bold line paper or any kind of low-tech device, an abacus. So the thing you would focus on here is, in 19, did the TVI utilize appropriate technology solutions to meet student needs? So you want to make sure that they're using the appropriate assistive technology or other tools that would benefit this particular student. And it should, the forward-thinking part of this statement is looking at number 20. Did the TVI integrate technology and or tools that directly relate to immediate and long-term student goals? Sometimes we don't keep in mind the long-term goals of the student, so you'd be looking for here, are we just doing something in isolation or that's really going to benefit a particular student over time if we focus on that. And then the seventh area is called student-centered higher order thinking. The TVI is patient and promotes student-centered higher ordered thinking skills. So this really has a range of what higher order is. And I think number 22 encompasses that. Was the student being asked to use critical thinking skills? And that can include things like questioning, making decisions, making associations, problem solving, based on student skill level. So even our students with the most multiple impairments are often able to do problem solving through just making choices. Simple choices could be the way that you would demonstrate using critical thinking skills that are based on that student's level. Are you always asking closed questions versus open questions? Are you asking the why and the how questions? That's the kind of thing you would be looking for to see if they're getting that student to think and problem solve on his or her own. And then number 24, this is a common one we see with new TVIs. Did the TVI allow adequate wait time for student processing and response? A lot of times we don't give our students time to think, so that we jump right in and provide the answer or prompt or ask the next question. So you would be looking here to see, was that TVI patient, waiting, and promoting student-centered higher order thinking? And then the last section, number 8, is working collaboratively with partnering educational team members. And the TVI here is communicative and team-oriented while working collaboratively with partnering educational team members. And partnering team members can be classroom teachers, can be related service personnel, can be family members, whatever would be appropriate. So number 25 says, was there evidence that the TVI collaborates with classroom teacher, paraeducators, and or family members? And does that mean you would be seeing that actually happening? Probably not, because you're probably working one-on-one with the student. So here you're looking for evidence of the use of materials or things that came from the other team members that were incorporated in the lesson. And then there's, the other questions down to 28. So there's 28 questions that you're going to focus on in 8 areas. And that's kind of an overview of the skill areas. And this is how you would fill out the RIDE in all 8 areas. And we're going to talk about collecting evidence in the next video and give you more information on how to do that. So now we want to discuss each of the competency and proficiency areas in more detail.
Hi, it's Rebecca again. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the competency areas on the RIDE. I'm looking at the 5 different competency areas and how someone could be rated. I wanted to point out that the average, or what you might expect to be a strong rating on this particular rubric, would be a 3. So here in the middle, which is effective. Most new teachers in training, are not going to get all 5s, or even all 3s, 4s, and 5s. That would probably be unrealistic, because at this stage of anyone's career in a new profession, you're not going to be highly effective in everything. Now, there probably would be a few things that you would be highly effective, but probably what you are going to see, and it's important that teacher candidates know this, that if they get 3s and some 2s, that is probably pretty much what one would expect. That there would be some areas that they are effective in with 3s, and then there would be some areas they are emerging in, so perhaps a 2. Now, if somebody got a whole bunch of 1s and a few 2s, there would be some areas of concern that they were not being effective in their instruction. And then that last column is NA, and as we mentioned in the first video, you really don't want to use this one very often. Almost every lesson would have all of these components that one who is observing would include and make some rating or comments about. And as we also mentioned in the last video, you want to put a comment under the strengths of lessons and suggestions for improvement. And especially anything that you give a 4 or a 5 to, that would be something you'd want to specifically praise and give an example of. Also, anything that you give a level 1 or 2, you'd want to give some kind of comment in the right-hand column so that the kind of feedback that we know is valuable to both children and adults, it's going to be specific feedback, and this rubric is going to help you target that feedback. But it's still important that you make those specific comments of things you saw that either supported your rating or that you might suggest that a particular TVI candidate or new TVI used to think about improving the lesson. Even if you scored the 3, there's probably still some things that you could write to help them in planning for future lessons, for example. So we don't want to skip that right-hand column. Now I'm going to talk about how you fill all of this out in the next few videos, but if you want to do it electronically, these little boxes are going to expand, and you can write as much as you think is appropriate, or you can write by hand, or you can attach extra sheets as needed. So if I write lots of comments over and over and over and over and over and over, and we'll copy this, you can see that the row expands. We also said there's not going to be many times that you would use the NA, but let's look down at section 8 briefly. Here in section 8, it's about working collaboratively with partnering educational team members. And when we were piloting this, some people felt like, oh well, we're just going to put NA here because we did not see any evidence of collaboration. But you really need to look a little bit deeper on that. For example, on question 25, was there evidence that the TVI collaborates with classroom teacher, paraeducators, and or family members? Well, you may not have seen exactly the other person. If you were working one-on-one with a student, you might not see that they were collaborating at that moment in time. However, if they were using, for example, classroom materials with that particular student, and it came from the general education teacher, then there was evidence that there was some collaboration going on. If you're working on a communication system that's going to be used at home, and there's evidence that there was collaboration, you want to look for those things. But let's say for number 26, was there evidence that the TVI collaborates with related service professionals? TVI incorporates skills into learning activity? You know, you may not see that on a given lesson. So in that case, you did not see any indication, so you might put an NA. And by default on the electronic version, all of the questions start off being rated as NA, and then as you change your rating, the NA box is cleared. And if you want to go back to NA, you just click that box. Again, it goes back to NA. So when you put an NA down, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. For example, if you know for a fact that a teacher is not collaborating, then you might rate her as a 1 or a 2 depending on the circumstance. NA just means that you honestly haven't been able to observe that in any of your observations, or as a result of anything that you've seen, you can't infer that this is going on. So this would be an example of how to use or not use NA, and as we said before, please use it very sparingly, and it's not something that you would use on a regular basis. You want to give someone a rating and then come up with a total score in the entire rubric. And we'll go over how the electronic version will do that for you in the 3rd video in this series. Or you can use a calculator or tally system if you're doing it by hand and come up with a rating for the bottom of the rubric. So we've reached the end of this video, and we have reviewed in detail the curriculum and instructional skill areas and proficiency levels, which are the rows and columns in the RIDE rubric. You should now have a better understanding of how the instructional skill areas relate to proficiency levels. The next video in this series will give you specific details about the tools and methods you may choose to use when completing the RIDE, either on your computer or by hand.